Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to add my voice to those of my colleagues and the touching testimony of Hatice Cengiz, whose future was taken away from her so shockingly. The perspective I want to bring tonight is one of a regional correspondent. I've been based in the Middle East for 13 years, and throughout that time, the voice of Jamal Khashoggi has loomed large. It's never been far away. It is fair to say, though, that in the last year, or last 15 months, Jamal's voice had never been stronger. His presence was remarkable. He resonated in ways that nobody else did. He had transformed from an important part of the Saudi establishment to being the most influential political pundit in the Arab world. And this transformation had come at a time when it was most needed. I listened to my colleagues before talk about this bleak landscape, this bleak media landscape in the region where self-censorship is prevalent, where there is no editorial independence in many of the countries that some of those that have been covering this matter. But the clawback of journalistic freedoms has been pervasive and profound, and it's been shocking to watch, and it was such a relief in many ways to see a figure like Jamal emerge in the last 15 months. He became a leader in so many ways. I last saw him in June last year, 2017, just before he penned these words in the Washington Post, which were, "I have left my job, my home and my family, and I'm raising my voice." Now, that in itself was a simple statement of intent, which went a long way towards establishing him as not just a regional figure, but as somebody of global significance, a Saudi national who was prepared to break free from those shackles. He was an insider who became an outsider. He was a potent threat because of that. I put him in touch with The Guardian. He wrote a couple of columns for us, and after that he ended up in Washington producing the most pointed, insightful criticism of the Saudi regime of anyone on the globe. And he did so not as a reflexive critic, he did so as a patriot. He did so as somebody who loved his homeland. His criticisms were not blanket, they were targeted, they were reasonable, they were fair, and they were potent, and that's why they did the damage that they did within the Saudi regime, because they cannot and they will not accept dissent in any way, shape or form. He did so also as a brazen accommodation was forced upon his homeland. The trade-off under the reforms, so-called reforms of Mohammed bin Salman, were limited social freedoms, economic reforms, but an elimination of civic discourse, dissent or criticism. And for him to be able to step forward and with the platform that he had, the presence that he had and the access to stakeholders that he had in Washington intimidated the House of Saud. He knew Saudi Arabia, he knew its secrets, he knew its weak points, and he was prepared to press them. He correctly picked also the character flaws in the man who ended up ordering his death. He did not shy away from saying that the Crown Prince of the country, the heir to the throne, was a man with judgment and temperament flaws, somebody who was not fit for purpose on many levels. At the same time, he did say that there were things that he was doing which Saudi nationals actually bought into. They wanted things to happen. But what he was providing was a platform of measured criticism which was challenging a man who was used to nothing but absolute power, and he was not prepared to tolerate this discourse that he was bringing. For the past month, I have covered these extraordinary events, both initially from Istanbul and from Riyadh. And it's been very clear that there's been a shock that transformed into an anger, and then a demanding for justice, which has been pervasive and prevalent. There has been a collective voice which has risen. And while I hark back to this fear that regional journalism is in a perilous state, I actually have seen a glimmer of hope in the last few weeks. Almost a tipping point. In Riyadh last week, and Riyadh is a lockdown place where even in taxis or in hotel lobbies, people will not criticise the regime. Until last week, where I must have had a good 15 to 20 people open conversations with, "This cannot happen to our country. what they have done to this man is haram. Now, that in itself is something to cling on to. This seems to be a moment where Saudi voices have been empowered because of the shocking circumstances of the death of our friend Jamal Khashoggi. Saudis themselves know the blatant fiction that says that a team of 18 hitmen could be sent from Saudi Arabia to Turkey to kill somebody. 4 of them are members of the Crown Prince's security detail. One of them is a forensic scientist who's the head, works for the General Intelligence Directorate, and the Crown Prince doesn't know about that. Of course that's wrong. Saudis know that, and they are using that blatant fiction as a pressure point against the regime itself. Also, seeing the force of international pressure brought on by journalism in many ways, diplomacy and others, it's given people a confidence to come back to the power of facts and evidence. It's partly restored, in my view, the value of truth. This is your legacy, Jamal, and it's a remarkable one, that in an age of narrative, objective truth starts to matter again because of the life that you lived. Now, the last year has been such a bleak landscape across the region where reality has been shredded by a relentless onslaught on reason. But I do hope, just in closing, that this shocking event, which has rocked us all, is going to mark a moment. Jamal saw himself as having a duty to speak out. He told me in an email last year that in some ways he regretted not having done so earlier. We had a to and fro on that. It was clear the political landscape that he came from, and it was clear that once he'd made that decision, he went full-throated and he went for it. And Jamal, when you did speak, it mattered. Your life and your untimely death has sparked a hope that I think, from my time in the field, both in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia in the last month, has been palpable and tangible. People are daring to raise their voices, to criticise and to challenge. A Saudi leadership that had enjoyed total impunity until early October doesn't have that anymore. The licence that it had been given by its allies to do whatever it pleases has been partly taken away from it, at least. Even Trump is struggling to defend the royal court at the moment, although I think he will go back to that default position. Jamal would always say, and this is something that he said in conversations with me many times, that he did not expect people to agree with him or even like what he said. The fact that he could speak out is why he was doing it. Talking out mattered. He wanted to debate. He wanted to contest for ideas, to challenge, to argue. They were rights well worth fighting for. And for that you will stand in history as a giant of your country and of the region and of the craft that you so loved of journalism. Thank you.